an important note about hand tools like this.
Be careful.
Is be careful, use eye protection. But this is a lower RPM double arbor motor. They're hard to find. I just bought one at a flea market this last weekend. They only turn from 1400 to 1700 RPM. Your standard grinder will turn about 3400. It turns way too fast for doing this kind of sanding.
So,
These sanding sleeves can be made or purchased. You just have to watch on eBay for them. I don't know if you can still get them from Goldsmith or Maltby. You'd have to look. But I've had these for years. I put my own sandpaper on just using a little contact cement, and I cut with about an inch overlap. These are getting to the point and they need to come off. So you can use hand sanding or machine sanding. This club has been redone once. We can chemically strip it, and we'll do that on the top. But you can see that it's cleaning up pretty quickly with a sander. So you can use power tools.
are you using the same grit on that? The same 100 grit?
This is the same 100 grit, but it's much worn, so it's giving me a very fine sand.
Right.
Sometimes before I do a chemical strip, I'll just lightly abrade the surface to give the stripper
something to bite into.
something to bite into. I've noticed lately that most of the strippers don't work as effectively as they used to, and I think that's for air quality regulations.
Yeah, those damn environmentalists, huh?
Yeah.
The enemy of the golf club finisher.
I don't know about that. They've done a good job keeping the air clean in California.
Yeah. So we're in
A lot of credit because they can be. I used to work with those guys when I worked with the county. They were something else. All right. These metal brushes that you can buy at Harbor Freight, very inexpensive, work real well.
Metal brushes.
It's a metal handle.
And little metal.
Yeah, they just clamp they're cheap. They're meant for
So this
that kind of work.
This isn't the horsehair stuff from a violin.
No, nothing fancy.
Violin bow. Okay.
Just something rough to get it on. Pour a little bit in this jar.
Now what is this you got in there? What kind of stripper is this?
This one is a Jasco.
Old Jasco, I remember that.
It's not bad. None of these work as well as they used to.
Yeah.
But it softens the finish and allows you to do a little scraping or steel wooling. And then I usually wash it with a little soap and water under the tap and let it dry real well before I try to do any more sanding. So you use that. And the trick I've learned is to use this is just an old jam jar with the lid that closes down tight, and any that's left over will usually be good for quite a while.
Mm-hmm.
It won't evaporate out and get solid. This is a fiber insert, so the stripper doesn't really hurt it.
Okay.
But some of your clubs are going to have plastic inserts.
Plastic
Cyclac,
insert.
you don't want to get the stripper on them, it'll melt them.
Okay, well, that's good to know. So the old McGregor and Spalding stuff and the old power belt would be okay with this stuff.
Most of them are. Some of the
Yeah, they started to use the plastic inserts.
some of the DX inserts were Cyclac.
Right.
See, in fact, they all were, as far as I know. So you don't really want to get the stripper on those. I'm going to clean that paint up there. Now I want to get a good amount on the toe because I want to try and clean out these stampings pretty well.
And see what we can do there. Well, that's some stinky stuff for sure.
Sometimes you'll lose this back weight, and that's a different subject at a different time. But we'll do a session on that at some point. Takes 10-15 minutes to work. Make sure it's covered real well. Just set the club down.
And we'll be back in a bit.
I'll be back in a bit.
Okay, so we're going to take this finish off.
Well, yeah, like I said, most of this new stuff doesn't work as well as the old, or maybe mine's just getting old, but you can scrape and try and loosen it up that way. And sometimes you need to do this more than once. But another trick I like is I get this inexpensive steel wool from Harbor Freight. You can get whatever you want. Kind of a medium grade, and I just spread the finish a little bit that way. You can see I went to gloves
Right.
for handling this.
Yeah,
For those of you who are
it's
sensitive, you may want to use a respirator of some
a
kind.
little tough on the skin.
Yeah, it can be a little tough on the skin. This method is good because it doesn't scratch the club. You can see most of it's coming off, but not all. So we might have to do it twice, or even 3 times. Or do a combination of things.
So you might add stripper a second time?
Might have to do 2 or 3 if I want to rely on chemical.
Right. Okay.
It used to be that the stripper would bubble the finish. You could really see it
that's
working.
that's what I
Yeah.
remember today.
But this stuff just doesn't seem to work like it used to. And it could be I've just gotten the wrong one.
Or it could be we're in California.
Could be we're in California.
Okay. Yeah, so you're just kind of taking the final bit of this stuff off with the...
With a fairly sharp knife, trying not to get into the finish. This gets a lot of it off. We'll just save the amount of sanding we have to do. I like to work up around
around the neck.
the neck and the stampings with this.
Okay, what are we doing now?
I put some Gojo orange hand cleaner on here, just any kind of soap. It'll sort of neutralize that finish. I like Gojo because it's got a little pumice in it, and it'll keep getting some of that old finish off of there.
Dry that off.
You can take that out and look at it. But you can see we got most of the finish off of that.
Okay, let's see if we can get some light on this here. Okay. So yeah, that's pretty amazing there. We got most all that finish off of that thing. And you can see we've preserved that stamping pretty well too. Well, it's really coming along nicely.
We might be able to work this right here with a sharp knife if we're careful. Nah, that's too much trouble. Okay, now one trick is I have a heat gun. Slide behind you. If I want to continue working without letting this head just air dry, I can just lightly air dry it.
Now does a little bit of the water that was on there, does that kind of help open up the pores a little bit?
A little bit, yeah.
For the sanding? Just a real...
I try not to get it down inside of here any more than I have to, but it dries pretty quickly. I've never had any trouble with that.
I mean, you wouldn't want it to be in the water more than a couple minutes.
You don't want to soak it and immerse it. You're running it under there just to neutralize the finish.
Open up the pores and get it dried off. Okay, so you're just going to go with that 100 grit again?
Yeah, a lot of times I'll use my machines, but this is the 100 grit, and
it just takes all that off now.
Look how I'm working with the grain, though.
That's really important to work with the grain.
As much as you can, especially on the finish sand. Now, one very important thing, and a mistake that newcomers make, is that they don't watch this line. It's very easy to oversand that line or to round it off too much. So you want to recognize that the smaller the area that you're sanding, the more the sandpaper is going to take effect.
Right, we want to keep that line.
So you want to keep that line. I don't want to go like that. It's okay to put that force up on the flatter surfaces of the club. But you see how I'm working with the line? Trying to preserve it rather than into it. I'm working with it.
Right. So what do we got here? A little bit on the
That's our lead sole plate. If you're careful, you can sand a lot of that out. Don't get too aggressive. We don't care if there's a little bit of pitting in there, that's fine.
Okay, so we've got it pretty much sanded down, right?
Pretty much. We're going to do some more finish sanding before we're done.
But we're going to work on the engraving.
Yeah, we're very lightly.
A little bit.
It should still be a little bit soft from the remover that we put on it. So I have to use a
A good
magnifier.
Right.
I've sharpened the tool that I made on my sander, just by just turning it like this against the sanding blade. All right, I'm going to start with a little bit bigger letter first, the A, and don't get too aggressive.
Now what's down in there? Is that a little bit of stain or paint or what?
Usually remnants
these
of
things,
paint.
they came out. They were usually black, weren't they, when they came out? Most
The
of them.
heads, no. The worse the grain, the darker the color.
So I know a lot of them were black.
You could have one bad head, and they might paint them black. 653s were usually black or very dark. 693s tended to be lighter, or maybe an armor red sometimes. All right, yeah. I can't stress how much a magnifier will help you with this. Even if your eyes are good. And as many times as I've done it, it takes a little looking. Sometimes I'll just wet it lightly with a little bit of saliva, so I can kind of darken the.
And you just work back and forth and all that.
It's interesting. I find the O's are the hardest to do and the most rewarding when you do them.
Sure nice to keep those original engravings.
It is.
As compared with just slapping a decal on there.
Before you do a Tommy Armour, look at how he forms the letters, because it's very unusual.
I always got a kick out of when they did the Turney Custom, and they did it in the same.
It looks so much like Tommy Armour, doesn't
it looks so much like Tommy Armour.
You can see that's a little deeper. We're just cleaning it out, just very carefully cleaning it out.
Cleaning it out, yeah.
This was probably done in gold originally, because I'm seeing remnants. Because sometimes I'll just do all the vertical strokes at one time, then I'll do the curving strokes. Once you get the club oriented, it's easier just to go in one motion. This is why I like the head off when I'm doing this sort of thing, because it's really a little easier to maneuver it.
Yeah, I would think so.
But it can be done with the shaft in. It isn't impossible at all. There's the T.
That's probably the easiest part to do, is that T. This is almost like sitting in the dentist chair or something, like dental work.
My hands get sore after doing a few of these.
Alright, well, I think we get the idea here.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you noticed there that there's a little bit of kind of a black, that's like a pitch mark, from the...
It is, and it's actually, it's part of the tree. And sometimes you'll see these dime-sized, and they can be out on the toe or down in...
I always liked seeing that on a club. I always felt like I was getting a hard piece of wood when
I think the manufacturer thought that it was too bad a flaw, so they tended to cover those up with an opaque paint.
Cosmetically,
yeah,
right,
cosmetically. Right. But what I've been told and what I've read was that was an indication of good hard wood.
I would think so.
So if you see a pitch mark, I don't really cover them up anymore. I let them stay, and knowing that that's really a pretty good block.
It's kind of a good thing, yeah.
It's
in
a good thing.
hindsight, it's a good thing. Got some harder wood. Well, that's sure coming along nice.
If we're careful, we can probably get that one out. See, I just can't hold on to it very well.
So you can really do this part really with the shaft in or with the shaft out.
I prefer it in, this final, because what I'm going to
do this with the shaft in.
Yeah, what I'm going to do before we're done is I'm going to go to this block. Your spongy block.
Okay, what is this?
It's a sand block.
What kind of...
I'm not sure who makes these, 3M or somebody, but they make a kind of a medium side and a very fine side. And you can, they're interesting that you can actually clean them up.
Wow.
And you can use them wet or dry. I don't wet sand golf clubs, but you could for a car or something if you wanted to.
So you don't know what kind of grit these are specifically?
It's pretty fine. If you can just feel it, that's probably 200.
Yeah, maybe 200, huh?
And I do this after I've got the club shafted usually. I'm just showing you, this you can kind of swirl if you want because it's so fine. It just takes any light scratch marks out from the previous sandpaper.